Thanks for watching and liking the video. I was sitting in the lawyer's office, staring at a document with my name on it. Yesterday, I was a nurse making $28 an hour. Today, I was the heir to $47 million. And I had no idea who that woman really was. 3 months earlier, my life was quiet, painfully quiet. I worked shifts through a private agency, taking care of elderly patients, mostly hospice cases. Nights, weekends, double shifts. I didn't complain. It wasn't a career anymore. It was survival. After my divorce, after losing my job at the hospital, I stopped trying to plan anything. I just needed to keep the bills paid, send the support checks on time, and stay out of trouble. I was 39, tired, and done pretending I was still going somewhere. When the agency called with a new assignment, I didn't even ask questions. Elderly woman, terminal cancer, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. They offered double my usual rate, $56 an hour. The address was in a quiet suburb outside the city, nothing fancy. I said yes right away. I needed the hours. I needed the money. The only strange thing was that the job request had my name on it. Not any available nurse. Not male caregiver preferred. It said my full name. The manager at the agency mentioned that the client had asked for me specifically. I told her that had to be a mistake. I'd never heard the name before. But she shrugged, said it was already approved, and sent me the details. I remember sitting in my car before the first shift, staring at that address on my phone. I almost canceled. Something about the whole thing felt off. Too personal, too specific. But I couldn't afford to lose the gig. I told myself it didn't matter who she was. I just had to show up, do my job, and keep my head down. That first night, when I walked in, I expected the usual: medical equipment, smell of antiseptic, the quiet rhythm of a house waiting for someone to die. It was all there, except for one thing. On the bedside table, next to the oxygen tank, there was a single photo frame face down. I didn't touch it. I just noticed the dust outline around it, like it had been standing there for years before someone decided to hide it. I told myself it was none of my business. My job wasn't to ask questions. Just keep her comfortable, stay professional, and leave when the shift was over. But as I stood there, checking her vitals for the first time, I had no idea that the woman in that bed had already decided who I was, and that my entire life was about to change. Her name was Elizabeth. She barely spoke at first, just nodded or whispered, "Thank you," when I helped her move or gave her medicine. I'd seen plenty of patients like her, quiet and withdrawn near the end. I didn't think much of it. I came in, checked her vitals, changed her IVs, made sure she ate at least something. The house was old but clean, with polished wooden floors and a faint smell of lavender. There were no family photos, no souvenirs, no trace of anyone else's life. It felt more like a waiting room than a home. During those first 2 weeks, nothing unusual happened. She slept most of the day, and when she was awake, she'd watch me silently from the bed. The only time I saw anyone else was when the daytime nurse came to switch shifts, or when the lawyer stopped by once a week. He never stayed long, 15 minutes at most. He'd hand her some documents, talk quietly, and leave. He always nodded politely at me, but never said more than "evening." I started to realize something strange. No one else ever came. No relatives, no friends, not even neighbors dropping off food or flowers. In this job, you get used to people disappearing when things get hard, but there's usually someone, a son, a niece, a church friend. With her, nothing. It was like she'd been erased from the world. One night, while I was helping her drink water, she looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were pale, sharp, like she was searching for something in my face. I asked her gently, "Do you have anyone I can call for you?" She hesitated, then whispered, "No, only your left." It caught me off guard. I thought she was confused. Many patients mix up caregivers with relatives when the mind starts fading. But the way she said it didn't sound like confusion. It sounded like fact. I didn't press her, though. I just nodded and went back to adjusting her blanket. After that night, I started noticing the silence more. The house felt heavier, as if it was listening. Sometimes, when I arrived for my shift, I'd see the lawyer's car leaving, and she'd be awake, staring at the door like she was waiting for something that never happened. Still, my focus stayed on the routine. Keep her comfortable, finish the charting, get paid. I wasn't there to solve her mysteries. But there was a moment one evening. I caught her looking at me again, almost smiling, like she'd made up her mind about something. It was small, almost invisible, but I felt it. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe this job wasn't just another night shift. Maybe she knew something about me that I didn't. About a month in, something changed. Elizabeth started talking more. Not much, just bits and pieces at first. Questions about my routine, how I ended up in this line of work. Then she started asking about my life. Where I grew up. If I had family. What happened to my marriage. Her voice was thin, barely above a whisper, but her eyes stayed locked on me every time I answered, like she was trying to read between the words. I kept my replies short. Born in Ohio. Divorced a few years ago. No kids. It was the usual small talk you make with dying people to fill the silence. But she listened too closely, almost studying me. One night, out of nowhere, she asked, "Your mother, is she alive?" I said no. She'd passed when I was 20. There was a pause. Then she asked, "What was her name?" I said, "Elizabeth. Same as yours." She went quiet. No nod, no smile, just stared past me like she was trying to remember something important. After a moment, she said softly, "That's a beautiful name." Then she closed her eyes and didn't speak for the rest of the night. I tried to brush it off as coincidence. People make those connections all the time. Same name, same stories, it happens. Still, that silence after I said my mom's name stuck with me. It wasn't just quiet. It was loaded, like she'd just confirmed something she wasn't ready to say out loud. Over the next few days, I started catching her watching me more often. Not in a strange way. More like she was comparing me to a memory. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything. Patients project all kinds of things when they're near the end. Regret, longing, confusion. I told myself that's all it was. Then, one afternoon, I noticed something on her nightstand. A tan folder, half open, with papers sticking out. I went to move it so it wouldn't fall. On top was a printed report, the kind private investigators use. I recognized the format immediately: lists, addresses, employment history. I didn't read it, but a few words caught my eye: the name of my agency and a list of employees. My name was circled in red ink. I froze. When I looked at her, she was awake, watching me. I didn't know what to say. I finally asked, "Were you looking for me?" She closed her eyes, barely moving her lips. "I've been looking for you my whole life." Her voice was so faint I wasn't sure if she actually said it or if I just imagined it. But in that moment, the air in the room felt different, heavier. I didn't know what she meant or what she thought she'd found. But deep down, something told me this wasn't just another dying patient. She knew me, somehow, and I wasn't ready to know why. On the 8th week, she asked me to bring down a box from the closet in her bedroom. Her voice was weak but steady. She pointed to the top shelf and said, "It's the brown one, with the string." I got a chair, reached up, and pulled it down. It was heavier than I expected. When I set it on the bed, a faint smell of paper and dust filled the room. Inside were letters, old photographs, and stacks of folded documents. She motioned for me to open one of the envelopes. I slid out a black and white photo, a young woman holding a baby. The edges were cracked, the image blurred. "That's me," she said quietly. "And that's my daughter. They took her from me when she was 2 years old." I didn't move. I'd heard strange confessions before. People at the end often spill their stories to anyone who'll listen. But her tone wasn't emotional. It was steady, almost rehearsed, like she'd told the story 100 times in her head, but never out loud. She went on. "They said I wasn't fit. I was young, sick, and alone. I tried to fight it, but they closed the case. I spent years looking, hired detectives, searched every record I could find. Then one day, the trail just stopped. She vanished into the system." I nodded slowly, unsure what to say. I told her I was sorry. It sounded useless the moment it left my mouth. She didn't answer right away. Her hand rested on the photograph. "I've lived my whole life wondering if she ever forgave me," she said. "I just wanted to know she was loved." Something in me twisted. My mother had been adopted. She never knew her biological parents, not even their names. I remembered her saying once, "Someone didn't want me, but someone else did." She said it lightly, like a joke, but I knew it hurt her more than she ever admitted. I looked at Elizabeth again. Her breathing was uneven, her eyes fixed on the photo. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I didn't let it show. The coincidence was too strange, Too close. I told myself it was impossible. People's stories overlap all the time. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. When I put the picture back in the box, she looked at me and said, "Thank you for bringing it down. You should keep it nearby. It might help you understand someday." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to. That night, after my shift ended, I sat in my car outside her house for a long time. The photograph kept flashing in my mind. The young woman, the baby, the name we shared. Something about her story was pressing against mine, like two puzzle pieces that didn't fit, but almost did. 3 days after that conversation, Elizabeth passed away. It happened quietly, sometime around midnight. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, half asleep, when I noticed the change. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. I checked her pulse, waited, checked again. Nothing. I called the nurse on duty and then the agency. The rest followed the same routine I'd seen dozens of times. Paperwork, signatures, final notes. When I left the house that morning, the sun was just rising. I thought that was the last time I'd ever think about her. A week later, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as her lawyer. He asked if I could come to his office for a matter concerning Ms. Elizabeth. I assumed it was about some form I'd missed, maybe a medical statement or a witness document. I agreed to stop by after my shift. The office was quiet, lined with dark shelves and heavy books. The lawyer was an older man in a gray suit, calm and formal. He shook my hand, asked me to sit, and then placed a thick folder on the desk. "Elizabeth left a will," he said, "and your name appears in it." I froze. "Mine?" He nodded slowly. "She left her entire estate to her lost granddaughter, the daughter of her only child, the one taken from her decades ago." He paused, watching my face carefully. "She believed that person was you." I didn't know what to say. I thought it was some mistake. He opened the folder and showed me a few pages, records, birth dates, adoption notes, addresses. "She hired a private investigator 3 years ago," he explained. "The search led to several possible relatives. Your mother's adoption matched the details. The timing, the names, even the state records lined up. Elizabeth believed your mother was her missing daughter." He leaned back, letting the words sink in. "She asked our agency to request you specifically. She wanted to see who you were before making any legal changes. For 3 months, she observed you, not as a nurse, but as family. She wanted to know if you were the kind of person she hoped her daughter had raised." I sat there numb. I remembered the way she watched me, the questions, the photo, the strange silence when I said my mother's name. It all started fitting together, painfully clear. "She changed her will after the 7th week," he said quietly. "Before that, everything was set to go to a charitable trust. But after she got to know you, she changed it. She wanted you to have everything." He looked at me with that lawyer's kind of sympathy that never feels real. "The total estate value is approximately $47 million. The number didn't even sound real. I wasn't thinking about the money, though. I was thinking about her voice, that last whisper before she died. "I've been looking for you my whole life." I just sat there, staring at the papers on the lawyer's desk, trying to process what I was looking at. It didn't feel real. He started explaining things slowly, as if talking to someone who'd just been hit in the head. He said the investigator had gone through every possible record: adoption files, hospital notes, court documents, my mother's birth date, her adoption timeline, even the city where she was born. Everything matched Elizabeth's missing daughter. He said the chance of error was less than 1%. According to the report, Elizabeth had known the truth for almost 3 years. She'd been tracking me quietly through that investigator, checking updates on my life, where I worked, how I lived, how I treated people. When she found out about her diagnosis, she decided it was time. She asked the agency for me by name, not to test me, but to see me up close, to see what kind of man I'd become without knowing who I really was. It made sense now. The personal request, the questions about my mother, the way she'd watch me, searching for something in my face. The lawyer went on, his voice calm and even. "She told me she didn't want to tell you while she was alive. She was afraid you'd treat her differently if you knew. She wanted to be sure you were sincere." I couldn't speak. The words felt like too much to hold. She had been my grandmother, the only blood relative I'd ever had besides my mother, and I hadn't even known. I'd cared for her, cleaned her wounds, listened to her stories, all while she sat there, silently knowing the truth. She wanted to make peace, the lawyer added quietly. But she was also cautious. She didn't want you to think it was about money. She wanted to see your heart first. He pushed the will toward me. My name was printed clearly on the front page. The entire estate, the house, the accounts, the investments, everything was now legally mine. $47 million. I didn't feel rich. I felt hollow. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to breathe. My mind replayed every moment I'd spent with her, the late-night talks, the silence, the photograph of the young woman with the child. My mother had been that child. The daughter taken away. She'd been searching for us for 50 years. And when she finally found me, she didn't say a word. She just watched. She let me come and go like any other nurse. The lawyer said she'd told him, if he's the right one, he'll show it without knowing who I am. I had been caring for my own grandmother, and she died without ever calling me that. When I left the lawyer's office, I just started walking. I didn't know where I was going. The city noise felt distant, like it was happening underwater. I walked for almost 2 hours before I realized I hadn't said a single word since I left the building. I wasn't angry. Not at first. Just empty. But the more I thought about it, the more it hit me. She knew. For 3 months, she looked me in the eye and said nothing. She listened to me talk about my life, my mother, my divorce, and never once said, I'm your family. She had the truth in her hands and stayed silent. I wanted to be grateful, but instead I felt robbed. I could have asked her about my mother. I could have heard her stories, seen the pieces of history my mom never got to know. But she'd chosen silence. She'd turned our connection into some kind of test. I stopped at a bench near the park and just sat there. I tried to understand her reasoning, but the anger kept breaking through. She wanted to see who I really was. That's what the lawyer said. But who does that? Who watches someone like they're an experiment? I wasn't her project. I was her grandson. Then another thought cut through all the noise. She was scared. That was the only explanation that made sense. She was afraid that if she told me, I'd start acting like someone else. That the kindness she saw in me would turn into performance. I kept replaying what the lawyer said. She didn't want me to know until she was sure. Until she'd seen me without filters, without expectation. He also told me something else before I left. He said she changed her will on the 7th week. Up until then, everything was supposed to go to a charity foundation she'd supported for years. But something in that 7th week shifted. She told him she'd made up her mind, that she'd found the person she'd been looking for. It made me remember those last few days with her. The small smile she gave me when I brought her breakfast. The way she said, thank you, without needing a reason. Every gesture she made. It was like she was already saying goodbye. Now I understood what that week had meant for her. While I thought I was just getting through another shift, she was deciding what would happen to everything she'd ever owned. She'd been judging me without telling me there was anything to judge. And the part that hurt the most, I passed her test. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like losing something I never got to hold. A month later, I went back to the house. I hadn't planned to, but something kept pulling me there. It was still empty, still quiet. The air smelled the same, a mix of old wood and medicine. Everything was exactly how I'd left it. The folded blanket on the bed, the water glass on the nightstand, the silence that felt too big for one room. I walked through slowly, like I was afraid to wake someone. The place didn't feel like mine, even though it was. The lawyer had given me the keys, the deeds, all the paperwork. But standing there, I felt like an intruder. I went into her bedroom and opened the same closet where I'd found the box. It was mostly empty now. A few clothes, a pair of worn shoes, a jewelry box with nothing inside. But on the bottom shelf, under a stack of folded towels, I saw an envelope. My name was written on it in shaky handwriting. I just stood there for a minute, holding it. Then I sat on the edge of her bed and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Forgive me, it started. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid. I was afraid that once you knew who I was, you'd change. I needed to see who you really were, not as my grandson, but as a man. Her handwriting was uneven, like her hand had trembled the whole time she was writing. I kept reading. You cared for me when you didn't have to. You were kind when no one was watching. You didn't do it for money or obligation. You did it because it was right. That's how I knew. That's how I found peace. I had to stop for a second. My throat felt tight, but not from crying. I just couldn't believe she'd been thinking all of that while I was right there, clueless. The letter went on. I know you probably feel angry or confused. I wish I could have explained everything face to face. But time ran out faster than I expected. You were the last good thing I got to see in this world. I know my daughter would have been proud of you. I am too. What I left you is just a way to say thank you. But the real gift is knowing that you are a good man. Don't ever doubt that. It was signed Elizabeth. No last name. No date. Just that. I sat there for a long time, holding the paper. The room was quiet except for the sound of the wind against the window. It felt like she was still there somehow, not as a ghost, but as something heavier. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then I stood up, looked around the room one last time, and realized there was nothing left for me to find there. The answers I wanted had already been given, just not in the way I imagined. I walked through the hallway and stopped by the front door. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every sound I made felt like an interruption. I looked back once more. The furniture, the curtains, the smell of her perfume still faint in the air. It all felt frozen, like the world had stopped the moment she died. I took the letter with me and locked the door behind me. Outside, the sky was gray. I sat in my car and just stayed there, not turning the engine on, not thinking about anything specific. $47 million were sitting in accounts with my name on them. A house that could have been sold for more than I'd ever earned in my life now belonged to me. But none of it felt like a win. It felt like standing at the edge of something I didn't ask for. I thought about my mother, how she'd grown up without knowing where she came from, how she died without ever meeting the woman who spent 50 years looking for her. I wondered what she would have said if she knew. Maybe she would have told me to forgive Elizabeth. Maybe she would have said that love doesn't always arrive the way we want it to. Sometimes it shows up too late. But I didn't say any of that out loud. I just sat there with the envelope in my hand, feeling the weight of it. When I finally drove away, I didn't know where I was going. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet. The city lights started to come on as the sun dropped behind the hills. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I just didn't know what came next. I thought about what she'd written, "Don't ever doubt that you're a good man." It sounded simple, but it landed somewhere deep. Maybe she was right. Maybe not. I wasn't sure anymore what being good even meant. I drove until I reached the edge of town and parked near a small overlook. I sat there for a while, looking down at the lights, listening to the quiet hum of the world moving without me. When I finally got out of the car, I left the envelope on the passenger seat. Then I closed the door, slipped my hands into my pockets, and started walking. I didn't look back. Thanks for listening to the story till the end. Write in the comments what you think about all this. Subscribe. More untold stories are on the way.